Well, welcome everybody to the Fasting Transformation Summit, where we're uncovering the most ancient, inexpensive, and powerful healing strategy known to mankind. We're talking about fasting. It's something our ancestors did. It's something really, up until this generation, we've practiced on a regular basis, whether we wanted to or not. And what we found with research is that there's powerful healing benefits to time-restricted feeding and also to prolonged fasting. And so I'm your host, Dr. David Jockers, and today we're going to talk about fasting and its impact on the microbiome. So we know that the gut plays such a significant role in our overall health. So we're going to go into really what role nutrition and then, of course, not eating, fasting, and how that impacts our microbiome. And so I brought on a good friend of mine who happens to be a specialist in the microbiome. This is Mike Mutzel, and he wrote a great book called The Belly Fat Effect that I would highly recommend to anybody that's out there listening. It's called The Belly Fat Effect. Really great book, goes into a deep dive on the microbiome, talks all about weight loss resistance and how we can impact our gut in order to help us burn fat for fuel and optimize our lean body tissue. And he also has a great podcast and YouTube channel that I subscribe to, and it's called High Intensity Health, where he interviews people all around the world that are experts in fasting, keto, microbiome, and functional medicine as well. And so, Mike, welcome to the Fasting Transformation Summit.
Dr. Jockers, thanks so much for the opportunity. It's great to be with you. We've had two amazing videos over the past couple of years. I'm super grateful to call you a friend and learn from you, continue to learn from you and all of the great work that you're doing. So honored to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks so much for being a part, and tell everybody how you really got started with functional medicine and what interested you in the microbiome.
Yeah, really good question. Like many people, I had health issues. My foray into this was through overtraining in college. I wanted to be a pro cyclist. Don't ask me why. This was back when Lance Armstrong was on the Tour de France, and my dad was really into it. Started racing for the school bike team, the college bike team, and was training 20, 25 hours a week and got really depressed, tired, had a lot of GI issues, constipation, diarrhea, and so forth. And I kind of knew that I was overtraining, but I went to the school doctor and said, hey, I feel really like lightheaded. Every time I stand up, I get dizzy. What's going on? And she's like, Mike, you're probably just depressed. It's your senior year. You're a pre-med student. Why don't you just take an SSRI? And I'm like, I really don't think that's the issue. So anyway, I went back to the medical research, typed in overtraining syndrome, and I found like this whole list of endocrinology and gastrointestinal complications in athletes that are overtraining. I was like, it's so weird that this doctor wouldn't tell me about this. Anyway, so I just realized there was a chasm there. Through a little bit of serendipity, started working with an integrative medical doctor right after I got into college. After college, got into a sales gig working for a functional medicine supplement company. So got really exposed that way. And my foray into the microbiome was through one of the medical assistants at Gerard Guillory's office, this integrative physician that I was working with, so I can get some hours and some volunteer work in order to go to med school. She underwent gastric bypass surgery or bariatric surgery. Lost, I want to say it was like 200 pounds or 250 some odd pounds within the matter of like 120 days. Didn't change her diet, which was really interesting because I thought like the doctors would tell her to change her diet. So she was still kind of eating some of that junk food, but lost the weight. And I thought there's got to be more to this than just restricting how much food someone can or can't eat via the procedure. So I went to the med school library. I loved researching and all that. And I'm like trying to figure out the mechanism of action of gastric bypass surgery, and who would have thought that it changes the microbiome, it reduces endotoxin exposure that we can talk about, it alters the gut hormones. These are the satiety hormones that are actually upstream of insulin signaling, of leptin signaling, and all the different satiety hormones. So I was like just amazed that this medical intervention, gastric bypass or bariatric surgery, really didn't have anything to do with like calories in, calories out so much. It was more about this metabolic effect. And I thought, okay, well, gastric bypass is very expensive. It's very invasive. It's irreversible. Probably not something that people should go out and we should all be doing. What are the natural ways that we can mimic this metabolic effect? And it turns out things like exercise, just chewing your food, eating food with people you care about, being grateful, taking deep breaths, like all the things our grandparents taught us to do, and mom taught us to do when we were growing up probably, but we're not doing anymore. even the time of the day, and we can talk about this, and when it comes to circadian rhythms and timer shifted feeding and so forth, tends to affect these gut hormones, affect the composition of the microbiome, thereby kind of mimicking that metabolic effect. So yeah, that's how I got into it. And I was just blown away by that. And I thought, you know what, I just want to keep diving into this, research rabbit hole, and then interview people and share that with doctors, because in my sales rep position, I realized that doctors are so busy in their clinical practices, managing insurance, managing the overhead. They didn't have time to go look into the research. And I thought, well, what if I can be a conduit to these practitioners and give them information that they're too busy, because they're spending a lot of time. Like, as you know, as a functional medicine practitioner, sometimes visits are 90 minutes, right? And back to back. And so that's kind of, I feel like, my life's work, and that's what I do. And here I am. So
yeah, absolutely. And so, let's talk about the microbiome. Obviously, you wrote this book. So you started studying the gut health and its impact on our metabolism. And you just got really, really deep into it. And you wrote this great book, The Belly Fat Effect. And so that's where you really define the microbiome and its impact on our health. And so can you do that for the listeners here?
Yeah, well, there's the Human Microbiome Project. Well, if we go back to like 1999, 2000, we all heard about this, the Human Genome Project, and it was touted to be kind of the answer to health. Like, as long as we know what genes we have, we can figure out if we're going to be predisposed to Alzheimer's, dementia, heart disease, cancer. And there was a lot of disappointing results from the Human Genome Project, because once we figured out the genes, we realized, well, there's this whole other field called the epigenome, and that's how the environment interaction, and which tells our genes to be turned on or turned off and so forth. And then we came across this organ that a lot of traditional doctors, integrative medical doctors, chiropractors, naturopaths, if they went to school before, say, 2012, didn't even really learn about. This organ now that's as metabolically active as our liver, which, as a side note, our liver is the most metabolically active organ we have. So our microbiome has more metabolic activity than our most metabolically active organ, which is crazy. And so our microbiome, this newly discovered organ, there's this big initiative back in 2012 about the Human Microbiome Project. And this was, really a multi-nation study, still ongoing, where researchers are trying to figure out how bacteria affect our health. And so when I just started diving into that research, and what we now know is that without our gut bacteria, we would not absorb some of the nutrients that we get from the food that we eat. All the different hormones that we think about, testosterone, growth hormone, cortisol, our microbes can synthesize and make any of these compounds. I know you've talked a lot about the ketogenic diet, and we'll talk about ketones and fasting here shortly. The main ketone body, beta hydroxybutyrate, that's made by our liver. Our microbiome make a very similar molecule called butyric acid, and it's so structurally similar. And there's some research suggesting that it may interconvert, butyric acid made by our gut bugs to beta hydroxybutyrate and so forth. So yeah, our microbiome, it's indispensable in terms of like optimal health. And what we now know is individuals that are born via C-section have different microbiomes than children that are born naturally through the vagina of their mother. Children that aren't breastfed and have infant formula have altered microbiomes, and therefore they're more predisposed to different diseases. Everything from atopy, skin disorders, autoimmunity, depression, dementia. The list goes on. But I think for most of the listeners, what's really interesting about the microbiome is the alterations that are linked with obesity and weight gain and insulin resistance. And so what was really surprising to me, having a master's degree in nutrition, kind of as part of the story we didn't get to talk about, I didn't want to share all the details, but yeah, I earned this master's degree in nutrition, and we were kind of taught in nutrition that you have high calorie, high sugar foods. Those raise blood glucose, and then your pancreas responds by, raising a lot by releasing insulin to lower the glucose. But what we now know is when you eat those high calorie, high processed foods that are associated with the Western diet, you actually perturb your gut microbiome and cause low level inflammation, leakage, also known as intestinal permeability, that causes literally bacteria fragments to get into the sterile compartments of the body, trigger inflammation, and that actually triggers the insulin resistance. So it's kind of a new way of thinking about how we get overweight and get insulin resistance and so forth. And I think in my eyes, it's really fascinating because then we can more custom tailor dietary treatments and focus on food quality.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think anytime there's a health issue, we've got to look at the gut and the overall diversity of the gut microbiome. And we've got to look at that and understand what's happening there and what role that's playing in that individual's health issues. And so what are some signs and symptoms that the microbiome is out of order, like a dysbiosis? Maybe you can define that term too.
Yeah. So dysbiosis would just, kind of characterize the imbalance of the bug. So there's, like we talk about dis-ease, dysbiosis, the biome refers to the bug. So there, and categorically, there's different ways of looking at this, the Firmicutes to Bacteroides ratio. There's various pathogenic microbes and phyla. And so there's different ways of looking at this. But what I like to tell people or have people a way to figure out if their own gut bacteria is altered is just ask some of the questions like we just talked about. Were you breastfed? Yes or no? Were you given antibiotics during the first several years of life? Yes or no? Were you born via C-section or vaginal delivery? Did you grow up near or around a farm or any farm animals, or did you have a pet in the home? Have you been given proton pump inhibitors, acid suppressants? Have you had a history of taking ibuprofen or over-the-counter non-steroidal anti-inflammatories? All of those, if you answer yes to a lot of those, there's a high probability that your microbiome is going to be imbalanced. Also, your diet, your exercise, your overall lifestyle, your life load, your stress, those are all going to factor in, right? So, I mean, this may be loose to say, but if you have a health ailment, if you have autoimmunity, if you have depression, if you have hormone imbalances, you have obesity, you have diabetes, there's a high probability that your microbiome is imbalanced. And then so the question becomes, what do we do about that? And, it's hard to argue with a whole real food style diet, all the lifestyle modalities. And as well, I'm sure we'll talk about very soon, compressing that feeding window, adding in some element of intermittent fasting, because I think part of the reason why we have all these imbalances with blood sugar, with inflammation and so forth is, now we have food being exposed to us 24/7, 365, which is really an unnatural thing. It's as unnatural as, I don't know, watching Netflix at 2 a.m, right? It's just one of these, we humans have evolved, and unindustrialized humans live and die by the sun and by sleep-wake cycles, right? Predators are out at night, so you want to be close to your family unit, your villages will, go to bed, right? And you're not going to be, eating out of the refrigerator or the freezer and so forth. And, I have backyard chickens, just to use a small example, and, they're prey for turkey, they're prey for foxes and coyotes and raccoons and all that. And in fact, a raccoon just killed one of our chickens the other day. But anyway, as soon as the sun goes down, they stop eating and they go in the tree or they go in the coop. It's like every single night. They are so predictable that, they're not like, as much as I live this stuff, like sometimes I have to edit a video or edit a podcast and I'll break my sleep-wake cycle a little bit, right? But like chickens, other animals, like they can't afford to do that, because if they do, they die, right? And when we break that, we don't necessarily die. We just become a little bit more insulin resistant. We have a little bit more food cravings. Our cortisol levels are off. And if we, prolong that over 10, 15, 20 years, we might have an early onset of an age-related disease. And so that's the thing when people are making lifestyle changes, sometimes we notice the immediate effects. Like if you fast for 24 hours, your mindset, you'll be more clear mentally, right?
Yeah.
But you may not lose 50 pounds right away, right? It's going to take a lot of time. So that's the hard part about making all these lifestyle changes for people is we want this instant gratification, but we must realize that it's the day in, day out habits. But anyway, going back to the sleep-wake cycles, when we start to break those and we start to have dinner later, we're going out with friends, we're drinking alcohol, we're having dessert, we're eating at all hours and so forth. Some people I remember in college, after partying, we'd have more food, right? Have pizza or go to Taco Bell at 2 a.m, right? A lot of people would do that. And then we wonder why we gain weight. Geez, the freshman 15, is it just the cafeteria food or are you eating all the time? Whereas before when you were at home, you probably didn't. So sleep-wake cycle, circadian rhythm biology is key for our own human cells, but also our microbial partners, right? They're an organ that live on and within us and contribute to our health. And so they have the same circadian biology mechanisms and genes and enzymes and all that. They have that same machinery. All animals do. I mean, this was discovered in the basically a worm, right? And Drosophila flies. I mean, this is how we discovered the whole circadian clock system. So we need to understand that. And so when we're feeding our bacteria outside of a proper feeding window, we're going to have different populations that will thrive, others that will not thrive. And the chances of creating a dysbiotic condition in that environment is very high. And so that's where, if you don't want to fast for 5 days at a time, I totally get it. But pretty much every single human should follow some element of time restricted feeding, compressing that feeding window. We just know that the biology is there at this point in time. And if we were to rewind the clock 200 years or go to some, sub-Saharan Africa and see people that are unindustrialized, they're doing that naturally anyway. And so should you. So.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, you look at some of some ancient tribes, like for example, even the Spartans. So, there's this great movie 300. The Spartans had this amazing resiliency, and they were known to fast through the day, right? And then kind of feast in the evening with their family, right? And they had this remarkable resiliency and strength, and they were able to take on armies much larger than themselves. So, it's something that has been known for centuries, and our ancestors, many of them actually knew the benefits of time-restricted feeding and practiced it. And going back to sleep, an interesting thing too is I was reading some research where melatonin, not only is that, obviously our sleep hormone, but it actually helps to regulate the microbiome. Have you seen anything on that?
Yeah, Lynn Patrick has talked a lot about that. I interviewed her on my YouTube channel, but melatonin is also just good for blood sugar health in general. So that kind of makes sense. There's some really good research on melatonin and fatty liver. And a lot of people, of course, that get into fasting for weight loss or blood sugar regulation we know that our liver is this key metabolic organ. It kind of doesn't get talked about a lot. But yeah, so melatonin is great. Something I recommend often. Take it myself. I think it's an amazing supplement for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, if we're eating very late at night or staying up late at night, we're going to suppress our melatonin production, right? So we want to get that really good melatonin production. So let's talk a little bit about intermittent fasting and how it impacts the gut. I mean, you've mentioned that time-restricted feeding and that role. So what have you seen out there in the research as far as how it impacts the gut? And then also what are some of the best practices for that? Like, what would you recommend to somebody to start applying when it comes to intermittent fasting to help improve their gut?
Brilliant questions. Yeah, I'll definitely address those. There's one thing I wanted to mention, and it's kind of controversial in the medical literature. You referred to Sparta and stuff, and their eating patterns it's kind of maybe a one meal a day. We could characterize it as eating more in the evening. Interesting though about that, and so I talked about this a lot in the book, Belly Fat Effect, is what a lot of people are doing is skipping breakfast, skipping lunch, or having kind of a late breakfast, a kind of a late lunch, and then dinner. There was an article that I think the Journal of Obesity Medicine in 2013, where I think it was 77 overweight women were characterized. Part of the trial was to put some have recommend a big breakfast and then fasting all day, or fasting all day, then a big dinner. And actually individuals lost, and this is so controversial, and I just think it's really interesting, and it adds in this element of personalizing everything. Some of these women actually lost more weight, had better blood sugar regulation by having the bigger breakfast. So I think, so then we hear, different things out there where people thrive skipping breakfast. Like I myself do thrive like that, right? Whereas my wife goes out, she does like a lot of walking in the morning to kickstart her day, gets her bowels moving and all that. She likes to have her breakfast afterwards, because then she goes into the chiropractic clinic, and if she doesn't have breakfast, she's like kind of tired, right? And started to lose that mental energy. So I think, whatever we talk about right now, just remember, folks, just personalize this to your diet and your lifestyle and what works for you. But what are the mechanisms as to how intermittent fasting may affect the microbiome and your gut and gut health? There's a lot of different speculation out there, but I think it comes down to the fact that eating is it's literally pro-inflammatory. I mean, we need nourishment, we need food. But if you think about what's in your gut, it's vomit and poop. No, really, it sounds
Yeah.
gross, but right. It's pro-inflammatory in a way because our gut is kind of outside our body, right? The internal milieu of the lumen is outside our body. And there's a lot of fermentation products due to these microbes. They're making secondary fatty acids. I mean, we know about acetate, propionate, and butyrate, the three short chain fatty acids, but there's so many other volatile organic acids. And those compounds affect, literally the local environment within our GI tract. And the other thing to keep in mind is just on the adjacent, so we have the internal lumen of the small intestine, which is majority of, in terms of length of the GI tract, just on the other side of that one single cell layer, which I'll just pause. It's important for people to recognize. Many people listening right now have probably had a paper cut at some point in their life. Our epidermis is 7 layers thick. Okay, 7 layers. Your intestinal lumen is only 1 cell layer thick, and it needs to be that, such that, if you had 7 layers of intestinal cells, you would die of malnourishment, right? So we kind of need this, we need to absorb stuff, but not too much so that we cause inflammation. So that's kind of the thing. So the way that the body gets around that is by placing a lot of what we call antigen sensing cells, toll-like receptors. These are all immune cells that are sitting there waiting. They're constantly sampling the environment, kind of like bodyguards or TSA security guards saying, okay, are you sure you don't have any guns or, liquid ounces over 4 ounces, things like liquids over 4 ounces, right? So that's what our immune system is constantly doing. And if we're constantly feeding that by eating, snacking, eating all the time, there's only so much work that, you can't work TSA agents 24/7, 7 days a week. They're going to just lose their vigor, right? Your immune system is the same way. Your immune system needs energy and fuel, and it has its own sleep-wake cycle. So by just constantly bombarding our gut with all these foreign material, that's what food is. It's non-self. It's foreign material. And you're requiring your immune system to work every single time you eat, right? And so when you eat a lot of junk food, constantly, all the time, you're constantly snacking, you're just literally creating inflammation, low-grade inflammation. And at some point, your immune system might get confused between self and non-self. And that's what we call autoimmune disease. And literally, if we look at obesity, obesity meets, I think it's 4 of the 5 defining criteria of an autoimmune disease. So it's really kind of interesting. Talk a lot about that in the book, Belly Fat Effect. The only hallmark of autoimmunity that obesity doesn't meet is there's no specific antigen that's there. There's an immunoglobulin antibody that's made against, right? Like we don't necessarily have antibodies against our fat tissue. So that's the only defining criteria of an autoimmune disease that obesity doesn't meet, which is really interesting. So mechanistically, I think part of it is just due to this smoldering inflammation from eating all the time. And you take that away when you compress your feeding window or when you fast. The other mechanism is related to gram-negative bacteria. So we've heard of endotoxin. Anyone that's a nurse or knows a doctor has heard about sepsis or septic shock. Heaven forbid, if you were to fall off your roof, it's Halloween, maybe you're hanging Halloween stuff around your house and you fall off and you puncture your intestine, for example, you would be leaking a lot of bacteria and you would get septic shock. And it turns out that a lot of us have low-grade sepsis and we don't know it. And so when we're eating, mostly a lot of fat with a lot of carbs. And that's where people get kind of confused about the keto diet because they hear, well, it's high in fat. And I read this one study that showed that causes insulin resistance. It's really in the context of high fat and high carbs together. So the analogy that I kind of use, and not to invoke violence, but carbohydrates kind of load the gun and fat pulls the trigger. So if you have French fries with a big 100 grams of sugar, liquid sugar, right? That's a great way to cause this endotoxin, which is basically, it's a bacterial fragment. We all have endotoxin within our GI tract. No one doesn't have it. The average human has about 5 grams of endotoxin in their GI tract, which is enough to kill you. If you were to perforate your bowel and didn't get rushed to an emergency center, you would die from endotoxin shock. So, your dietary choices, your exercise choices, your feeding window pattern can increase levels of this endotoxin into your bloodstream. And there was an interesting study that came out in 2012. It was a journal of Plus One Biology that found that endotoxin in the blood correlated with body fat percentage, visceral adiposity, triglycerides, and blood sugar. Okay, again, these are all factors of the metabolic syndrome. These are all factors of diabetes, prediabetes, of obesity, right? Again, a lot of folks listening may be interested in fasting because they want to lose a little belly fat or they want to improve their blood sugar. And so again, we now know that part of the reason that you may have gotten those diseases in the first place is due to, goes back to the gut, right? So that's why the impetus for improving gut health, compressing that feeding window and fasting. So yeah, I think I answered your question. I know you had a third one in there about ways to do this.
There goes the Krispy Kreme donuts, right? The fat and carb combo. So
yeah.
Classic in America. Yeah, I mean, I think I think you hit it right on there with endotoxin. That's a big that's a big thing that to talk about, and research has shown that it reduces endotoxemia. In fact, I saw something. Let's see, this was out of Journal of Neuroinflammation, 2014. This is on rats, but what they did is they did them on an alternative day fasting, so 24 hours every other day, and they showed a pretty significant drop in LPS activity. LPS induced elevation of certain cytokines and tumor necrosis factor alpha, all these genetic pathways that are associated with chronic inflammation. And they also showed that the intermittent fasting, they did it for 30 days, every other day. So 15 days they fed, 15 days they fasted. So it would be like you fasting Monday, Wednesday, Friday, for example. And they showed a significant rise in interleukin-10, which it had an anti-inflammatory effect on the body. So, pretty significant there. Now, again, it is on rats, but, there's a lot of people that have had similar benefits. In fact, for myself, I actually started with time-restricted feeding when I was in graduate school before I knew anything about fasting. In fact, I was taking classes because I got a master's degree in exercise science. And I was taking classes where they were saying, well, you've got to eat 6 meals a day. You need to eat in the morning before you work out. And so I just noticed that I felt better. I had struggled with irritable bowel, and I noticed that I felt better when I didn't eat. And for me at the time, it was not eating in the morning, right? And I still practice that. I would just drink a lot of water. In fact, I would bring a gallon of water with me to my classes in the morning. And I typically would work out in the morning. And I just felt so good. And I wouldn't actually get hungry till about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And then between 3 and 6 or so, I would eat a whole lot of food. I eat all my calories. And I gained significant amount of strength, muscle mass. I felt amazing. I felt incredible when I was doing this. And at the time, I actually thought it was the water. I thought, well, I'm just super hydrating my body, and this must be why. And now with the research coming out on fasting, I realized why. Because at the time, as I started that, I was struggling with anxiety, with issues with concentration. And it was like, that just went away. I felt so much better. I had always struggled with just challenges in maintaining muscle mass. And I didn't have that issue anymore. I was able to maintain my muscle mass easily with this. And I was sleeping better than I had ever slept, right? So I noticed that I saw that improvement. It wasn't until years later that people started talking about fasting. And even I even came across the term intermittent fasting. And I was like, this is what I practice. And so it just came intuitively to me, but it started with a gut issue. And so that's really how I got started with it. And so I know you were talking about some people do better eating breakfast in the morning. So what would be some guidelines that you would give somebody when it comes to, let's say they have a gut issue, irritable bowel, autoimmune disease or something like that we've talked about, maybe acid reflux? What would be some guidelines that you would want to give with somebody when it comes to time restricted feeding? And you can also include, other lifestyle habits like, really prioritizing sleep, exercise, things like that.
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, I think it comes down to your goals, right? For a lot of people, if weight loss is your goal, fat loss is your goal, we know that from the circadian rhythm, circadian biology research, that we tend to burn more fat in the morning. Actually, it's while we're sleeping, we tend to burn a lot of fat. Actually, our mitochondria are really active at night while we're sleeping, and fatty acid oxidation increases. And we now know that people that do shift work, people that don't get good sleep, people that have sleep apnea tend to gain weight, right? Well, that makes sense, because if you're not taking advantage of this time during the day when you're burning the most fat while you're sleeping, then you're going to gain weight. So interestingly, what I would say to people is, again, if you're exercising in the morning, fat loss is your goal, then just try to do the one meal a day, or kind of like backload your calories, like you were saying, Dr. Jockers, in the afternoon, right? For people with kids and you have a family, it makes sense. Like, you want to be able to dine with your family. And so that's what I generally try to do. But if like for me personally, I do generally like to have breakfast if I'm working out that day. I just find that like I have a better workout. That's just me. I don't know why. I've tried doing the workouts fasted and I just don't have the same energy. So I do more powerlifting type movements and everything along those lines. So that's just my personal approach. I just have a small little side story on that. So I'm doing a powerlifting competition this Sunday, and like a couple of weeks ago, like 10 days before the event, you want to try and figure out what your max is, where you start, because you have 3 tries to do a squat, then a deadlift, then a bench. And I was fasted, just had like my bulletproof coffee with a little butter, a little MCT oil. And my squat was like at 250. Normally I can get close to 300. I'm like, what the heck is going on? So I just went and, cause I was pretty much in a low state, just MCT oil, a little bit of butter, went and got an apple, came back and then hit like 280. And I was like, man, that context is important. Like we get into this state where carbs are bad, fats are always good. But like when you're doing something that requires like glycolytic breakdown, and stuff like that in terms of powerlifting. So I think it comes down to people need to figure out what it is their goal. Don't just jump onto it because it's popular. Fasting's popular, keto's popular. Okay, cool. But why are you doing it? And what is the goal that you're trying to seek? And so weight loss is your goal. You can backload your calories. If you have kids, backload your calories. There's nothing better for a child than to everyone sitting around a dinner table. I know you have a routine where you talk about being grateful and things along those lines. Like that is key for instilling good eating habits, right? So that's what I would suggest. But again, you can just try certain things like alternate day fasting, like you referred to. That's very popular. I've ran into several practitioners who all they tell people to do is just fast during the daytime. So say starting Sunday night at 5 p.m., have your last meal with your family, have an early Sunday dinner, fast Monday until 5 p.m., eat normally as you would Tuesday. Do the same thing on Wednesday, fasting. So you cut off early at say 6 on Tuesday. Don't eat again until 6 on Wednesday. Normal eating Thursday. Friday, you're fasting until dinner. So just something simple like that can just kickstart things in the right direction. And people feel like, we don't realize how much time we spend thinking about food, cooking food, preparing food, prepping food. It can become a total pain in the butt. So, and a lot of us say, well, I don't have time to exercise because I'm just so busy. Well, if you can take out an hour and a half or 2 hours of the day, you don't have to worry about prepping food. Maybe you can squeeze in that exercise on that day, right? So that's what I would suggest is getting specific about what your goals are and trying to figure things out, and really be science-based about it. So use things like the Oura Ring, which is here. It tracks heart rate variability, tracks sleep. Go out and just go to Walgreens or Rite Aid or a local drugstore, get a glucometer, test your glucose, see how your blood sugar is during the days, but maybe you eat breakfast and skip dinner versus if you skip breakfast and eat dinner, so that you know what's going to work for your own biology. So that's what I would suggest to people. And I know people just want to know the protocol. Tell me what to do, but it's not what works for me may not work for you. What works for you may not work for me, right? So that's what I would suggest. But I think having interviewed a lot of different people, having read tens of thousands of comments on my YouTube channel, I would say the majority of people do better by skipping breakfast and kind of backloading their calories as you suggested. And I think if there's the smaller percentage of people tend to do better with breakfast and skipping, because the thing is, once you start eating in the morning, you have breakfast and you're like, well, I already ate anyway, so I'm going to have lunch, and then I'm going to have dinner, and then a snack, and it creates this kind of, you just end up consuming a lot more calories and so on. Whereas if you just say, look, I'm not going to have any food until 3 p.m. or I'm just going to fast until dinner, that's it. That's the only decision you have to make. So it almost becomes easier to do that backloading method. So yeah, it's really personalized, but you can't go wrong with starting there or doing the alternate day fasting. There's a lot of great research on that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I find that it's a little easier socially for people to do more of the carb backloading, because typically in our society, lunch and dinner tend to be more of your social meals as opposed to breakfast. And it's hard when you're in a social setting to miss the meal. Personally, I actually fast through dinner 2 to 3 times a week, but at the same time, it's actually helpful. Like my wife actually likes it when I'm fasting because I'm like helping my kids out more. I'm just focused on my kids. And once you create a habit around this, like for example, on Wednesdays, I typically eat lunch. I just find that eating lunch, I feel better in the afternoon. I'm more productive as opposed to if I fast through that period of time. I just don't feel as productive. And then I sleep significantly better that night, as opposed to if I fasted till dinner. That's what I have found actually for myself. But also at the same time, I've been doing this for a while. So where my wife might make a great dinner and I'm there helping feed my kids and I'm smelling it and it smells good. And part of me is like, this smells good. I'd like to have some. But the other part of me, like the deeper part of me is like, no, I will not, I will, it's like, I just know how good I'm going to feel by fasting here. So I'm absolutely going to fast, and it's a stronger sense because I've been doing this for a while and I know the benefits of it. I know how energy efficient, how mentally clear I feel when I'm practicing this on a weekly basis. So a lot of intuition, playing around with it and just following your intuition. I think that's a big thing that you're getting across here. Now, as far as, because a lot of people work late at night, they might work till, let's say, 7 or 8 o'clock, right? Come home and eat dinner. So if somebody can control their environment, when would you say would be the last time they should eat? Like, what would be the cutoff time to then get a really good, highly effective sleep?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think give yourself at least 3 hours before bedtime.
Yeah.
And so that's a tough thing. But if you do, I know a lot of people do work late, and I totally understand that. I mean, if you're in the restaurant business, various business, social businesses, my wife sometimes at the chiropractic clinic will stay and see patients till 7, 8 o'clock at night. So on those days, she'll bring food in with her and trying to eat at like 5, because as you just alluded to, and multiple studies show this, the timing of food. When you go to bed on a full stomach, first of all, your gut, just like how we talked about our body and our microbes have this internal circadian clock. Our gut has its own circadian clock. And it turns out that motility, pancreatic lipase release, bile release, stomach acid release, all these factors needed to digest and absorb food tend to decline as the day goes on. So they kind of peak around 4 or 5 p.m. and then will peter out. And of course, everyone's circadian rhythm is slightly different, but your gut is not super active at night. And so late night eating is linked with dysbiosis, the imbalance of the gut bugs that we're talking about. So a simple strategy, I know daylight savings is coming on and winter's coming and stuff like that. And, this is a great time to start fasting because, we've known about this for a long time. And I alluded to the chickens and everything like that as a small example, but, just try to eat during the daylight hours. If anything else, if you're confused about where to start and you're like, I don't know, I love my breakfast. Okay, fine. Just eat during the daylight hours. And so when the sun starts petering down and the evening is coming on, you should probably have your last meal. And don't make it a huge one because, there's nothing that can throw off your sleep more than having a big meal and you're grumbling. And that creates maldigestion and other gut issues and motility issues and constipation. And it's a lot to deal with. So that can be just a super simple thing, is just eat when the sun's out, don't eat when it's not.
Yeah, I love that. It's a great recommendation. What I'll tell people is, especially when you're trying to time out your eating window and your fasting window. So say you want to do like a 16-8 or something like that, where you're fasting for 16 hours. If you're somebody that does work an evening job, then you might be the right type of person to eat breakfast, right? Breakfast and lunch, and then just fast, in the afternoon, evening. And that can be really helpful. Your largest meal maybe around lunch, take a nice siesta, and then go into work afterwards. Rest a little bit, allow your body to digest it well, and then go into work. And what you'll find is that, like, for the first day or two, you miss that dinner, but your body adapts. That's the amazing thing. Your body, like, we don't like change, but actually our body gets better with change. And so we adapt, just like exercise. The first time you go in and work out, you're going to be really sore. You're going to be really tired. You're going to think exercise is terrible, but actually you get stronger through it. And so it's the same thing with fasting. So if you do work that evening job, you're like, well, how do I do this? I get home at 9, 10 o'clock at night. I need to have something. I would say, kind of the first baby step might be, instead of having a big solid food meal, maybe have a protein shake or something like that, like something easy on the digestive system. And then I would say second step would be just fast, maybe have some herbal tea or something like that. And, eat breakfast and lunch as your meals and have that as part of your fasting window. What do you think about that, Mike?
I think that's awesome. Yeah. I mean, it comes down to this customization and like you said, I mean, a lot of people, and I like this, that people follow the gurus and do exactly what the gurus do. But again, unless you have that same exact lifestyle, biochemistry, microbiome diversity, it's not going to work for you. So just totally feel free to customize. And, most people that are successful with any diet or really anything in life, any business, any exercise program, they're breaking the rules a little bit.
Right.
Yeah, there was a study, I mean, not to deviate the topic too much, but it was in elderly individuals at nursing homes, and the people that broke the rules and like would, do different things, like, play cards when they shouldn't, and lived longer. Right. And so it's kind of interesting that like
It's funny.
you get in. Yeah. So we want to follow everything to a T. And I see this a lot with moms, with women. They want to do everything right and everything's so perfect. And just tell me exactly what to do. But just have the mindset that you need to like deviate a little bit because it's a little bit different. And just remember that study in elderly individuals. When I read that, I was like, that's so funny, because that was like my grandfather. He was always like doing things that he shouldn't have been doing, lived a long, great life and everything along those lines. And so you don't have to break the law. You don't have to follow the rules to a T. Feel free to customize. But going back a little bit to the mechanism, just wanted to highlight one thing. You hit on that anti-inflammatory interleukin 10.
Yeah.
Hear about cytokines and interleukins. They think they're all bad, but interleukin 10 is anti-inflammatory. It's can really affect the onset of, say, autoimmunity and allergies. It's a good thing. We want to have that to keep our immune system in a tolerogenic type state. And there were some studies showing that time restricted feeding and intermittent fasting in humans increased Akkermansia mucinophilia. And that's a type of genus and species of bacteria that degrades mucin that we want. And then also Faecobacterium prausnitzia. It's kind of a big tongue twister, but fasting increases those two bugs, and those bugs also increase IL-10. So just wanted to let people know that we are kind of figuring out some of the mechanisms there. Endotoxin, like we talked about, is probably a big factor, but also the change in the gut bugs and their associated changes in interleukins and cytokines is part of the mechanism as well. So people have heard about biofilms and things along those lines, where bugs can live in these biofilms and kind of create this layer that's impenetrable by our immune system. And so this Akkermansia mucinophilia degrades that mucin. So we don't have so much mucus and film and gut and yuckiness. So when you fast for a long period of time, the way that bug literally survives is by degrading this mucus. So you have a natural way to kind of degrade biofilms within your intestine, which is pretty cool.
That is really cool. And when I had my microbiome studied here with, Ubiome, I actually had a lot of that particular bacteria in my system. Nice. So, and it's something I practice, obviously, intermittent fasting. So, that definitely makes sense. And, I also sent over that study that, Cell Metabolism 2018 study. That was interesting as well, where, they showed that intermittent fasting led to an increase in your lactobacilli, your bacteroideae, your Prevotella species, right? And they increased their their antioxidant metabolic pathways, right? So reduced overall oxidative stress throughout the gut. And so I always think about it like just weeding a garden. It's like if we constantly eat, in a sense, we're just constantly feeding the garden, but we're not actually weeding it, right? So everything grows, good and bad. When we fast, it's like we're going in and we're pulling out the weeds, right? Which are kind of these opportunistic plants that grow and steal nutrients from the things we want to grow. So we're going in, we're weeding it out, and we're kind of customizing our garden. And that's what time-restricted feeding and even doing, a prolonged fast for time to time can do for our system, is just weed out the garden.
It's a brilliant point. And folks at Cedars-Sinai and UCLA that are working with SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, they frequently recommend a elemental diet, which is basically amino acids, and that's about it, right? And some proteins to help to basically just starve out these bugs. And so a lot of people coming into this, summit, and have heard about autophagy, what process where our cells can kind of engulf other parts that may not be as functional or defective. We know of mitophagy, where our mitochondria actually get engulfed, our defective mitochondria, for example. And now we can think about fasting as a strategy to really kind of get rid of bugs that don't need to be there. And those bugs are probably more susceptible to being degraded, the pathogenic bugs, if they don't have the environment or the milieu that fosters their growth. And it's most oftentimes that is carbohydrate-based foods and sugars and so forth. So by just getting rid of all food for a while and doing a periodic, I don't know about you, but long-term fasting, I do like once a quarter, I'll do at least 3 days. And I find it's a great way to just check in and realize like, wow,
Yeah.
I'm craving food, but I'm not even hungry. I'm just craving food because I'm lonely, or I just want food because there's some emotional trigger or something, or it's just the habit, right? You realize that you go into your house, and a lot of people I was going and grabbing pecans and Brazil nuts every time I came in the house. It was like, well, no wonder I'm like, it's just, there's
Yeah.
all these emotional triggers and different things. And so I think structuring in some prolonged fasting.
Yes.
Obviously, there's tons of health benefits that we know about physiologically, but on the emotional side, just being more aware of like what's triggering you to crave foods. And some people will comment in on my YouTube channel and say, "Hey, Mike, I just have these food cravings. I can't do keto." And I'm like, "Well, I just crave carbohydrates." And I write back, "Well, is it like a low blood sugar thing, or is it this emotional connection where it's this habit, or maybe uh, eating, maybe you and your father or you and your mother or whatever, and maybe they're not here anymore, you would go out and have mangoes. And so you're craving those mangoes because you're missing someone." There's so much more about our food choices than just like the macronutrients and so on. And so I think fasting, and even just a 24-hour fast or compressing your feeding window helps you kind of be more aware of these emotional triggers to food that we have and ideas around food. And it helps us to overcome that so that we can achieve a stable, consistent body weight and long-term health.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think most of us, we get a hit, we get a dopamine hit. Dopamine is this feel-good neurotransmitter. When we eat, it naturally stimulates that, which is a great thing. It kind of drives us to want to eat on a regular basis, which is necessary for survival of humanity. But like you started this interview, you were talking about, hey, we've got food everywhere. It's like I've got enough food in my house to last my family a week, at least, if not more, right? And we can literally eat around the clock because of how much food we have. Our ancestors didn't really have access to that. So when they did get food and they had to work hard for it, they would get this natural feel-good mechanism that would reward them for eating and reward them neurologically. And so kind of like, sugar, cocaine, things like that, any sort of addictive mechanism. So it's very easy to get addicted to food because it's all around us. It's accepted, it's whereas like, smoking, doing illegal drugs, things like that, that's not socially accepted in most circles. Whereas this is, right? And people don't necessarily know the risks, especially if they aren't obese. They don't know the risks of, continually eating all the time and stoking these feel-good addictive neurotransmitters. And so when we take some time without stimulating those, it really helps reset our brain. It's one of the best things you can do for resetting your neurotransmitters, resetting your senses. And you're absolutely right. Like doing a periodic 3, maybe 5-day fast, something along those lines, is such a powerful reset for that. And I'm with you. I do it pretty much every quarter, if not twice a year. I just did one about a month ago, 4-day fast. You believe this, Mike? 4-day fast. And on the 4th day, like I was going to go 5 days, but in the afternoon on the 4th day, I felt so good and so energized. It was like, I've got to go lift weights. Like my body was just saying, I need to lift weights, right? Because I didn't work out, during that period of time. And I went in 4 days, fully fasted. Like I started fasting on Sunday. It was Thursday. And I was just as strong. I was going to take it easy, but I just felt so good. I was just as strong as, when I'm fed, right?
That's
I felt
awesome.
so amazing. And I wasn't even hungry afterwards. Now I did break it with a protein shake afterwards, but I wasn't even hungry. And it was, in a sense, like I always compare fasting to exercise. You start to build your fasting muscle, right? As you do this, as you experiment with this. And it might start with a 12-hour, fast between your last meal and your first meal. And then you might bump it up to 14 and then 16 and then possibly, 18, or even doing something like an every other day fast. You got to find what works for your schedule and intuitively what you feel like your body is needing. Like, for example, I was going to go 5 days because I'm like, the 5th day is when I get the massive stem cell increase. But my body was saying, no, I want to lift weights now and I want to break the fast later. And so I just listened to the body. I didn't need to get, I'm sure I probably got a significant amount of stem cell release and it was enough for me. And so, but anyways, with that said, you got to listen to your body. And as you start to practice this, you'll get more and more intelligent and stronger with it, where, a 2, 3, 4-day fast won't be as intimidating because it's something that just built in a part of your lifestyle. And you'll actually crave the benefits that come with it. The renewed clarity, the mental clarity that you get, the freshness. I know after I did that for like a month, I felt so fresh
Mm.
And like I was recovering from exercise so much better, and my sleep was deeper, and it was prolonged after doing that. And that's why I do periodically, typically every 3 to 4 months, I'm doing an extended fast along with the intermittent fasting strategies. So with that said, Mike, this has been a great interview, just such great content. Any final words of inspiration for people that are listening? And then also, where can people find out more about you?
Yeah, great question. I guess to finish off on this exercise conversation, I think it's important to, fasting is a wonderful tool, but exercise too also increases autophagy and mitophagy and all these mechanisms that we've been kind of talking about linked to fasting. Exercise does affect bacterial diversity. And just as if we haven't mentioned it yet, diversity in your microbiome translates into stability. So the ecosystem is just stronger, can withstand more ups and downs and ebbs and flows, which is a good thing. So I love exercise. Fasted exercise can be great too. But yeah, I see some people, they don't exercise because they're doing so much fasting. And I think that's, again, we want to balance things out a little bit. And so exercise can be a wonderful modality. So don't forget that. There's a ton of research on that. And interestingly, some of the adaptations that occur from exercise, like muscle hypertrophy and losing body fat and all that, is autophagy driven. And so it's like, it's interesting how it works. So yeah, I just want to finish off on that. Exercise as a lifestyle modality is key. Tracking your sleep. Everyone should go out, and if they don't have a glucometer, go out and get one. Obviously, keto meters can be great. I know you love the Ketonix breath meter and so forth. There's a lot of great tools, but starting out with just inexpensive, looking at your blood glucose, looking at your sleep-wake cycles, can be wonderful. So those are kind of the final words of advice. If folks are interested in connecting with me, I would love to connect with you. Pretty active on Instagram at metabolic_Mike, or if you just type in Mike Mutzel, you will see my handle, and on YouTube as well. And the channel is High Intensity Health. So
it's great, Mike. Yeah, definitely check out his YouTube and podcast as well. Some really, really great interviews, including myself, right? So we did a few interviews on there. But yeah, great input. And I love the, talking about exercise. And, that's another thing we've talked a little bit about in this summit is just fasted exercise. And I know you said for you, it doesn't work great, but I know for myself, I try to exercise at the peak of my fast. I just feel so good there, and I'm stimulating even more autophagy when I do that. So like if I eat, dinner, for example, like last night I ate dinner, finished about 6 o'clock. And then today I worked out, it was about 12:30, right? And then I broke my fast after that. And so that's typically, I just feel so good, so mentally refreshed when I do that. So find the strategies that work best for you. Mike, again, thanks for the phenomenal interview. That was awesome. And for those of you guys that are out there, just want to remind you that fasting, we've been talking about this throughout the summit, it can unlock the dormant healing potential within you. It's safe, it's powerful, and it just might transform your life. So give it a shot. And if you've been enjoying the interviews in this summit, then I want to encourage you to consider owning the entire Fasting Transformation Summit for yourself. That way you get access to the MP3s, so you can listen to this while you're working out, like Mike was talking about, right? While you're out taking a walk. You can also, you'll have the transcripts, so you can read through those. You'll have all the bonuses, everything for a lifetime. And I find this particularly helpful if you are starting a fast, especially an extended fast, to actually be listening to interviews of people talking about the benefits of fasting. Fasting at times can be lonely, especially if you're doing it, you're the only one in your family. But listening to experts like I'm interviewing in this summit can be so helpful and so refreshing, and just make you feel like a superhero while you're going through the fast, and encourage you to follow through. So if you would consider owning this for yourself, we'd be so honored, and I know it'll give you a lot of value. So we'll see you guys on a future interview. Be blessed, everybody.